The man walked slowly along the quiet street, his worn shoes scraping lightly against the cracked pavement. His coat, though clean, had seen many seasons and carried the faint smell of old rain. The morning air was crisp, and a few early commuters hurried past him, barely noticing his presence. He paused for a moment to straighten the small folder he carried under his arm, a simple leather case that had seen better days, and then continued toward the bank at the corner of the street. From a distance, the bank looked busy and modern. Large glass windows reflected the rising sun, and inside, people moved quickly, their voices blending into a soft hum of transactions. The man hesitated at the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The subtle jingle of the bell above the entrance sounded like a small announcement of his arrival, though no one seemed to notice it in the flurry of activity. He stepped inside, letting his eyes take in the interior. The bank was filled with a mix of customers and staff, some talking in low voices, others tapping away at keyboards or shuffling papers. The teller counters were lined with shiny metal dividers, and behind them, employees typed numbers with precision, their faces set in polite but distant expressions. The man approached the nearest teller with slow, careful steps, trying not to draw attention but wanting to be seen. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "I have a few questions about a loan I am considering. Could you help me?" The teller looked up, glanced at his worn coat and scuffed shoes, and let a faint sigh escape her lips. She did not hide the slight look of annoyance. It was clear from her expression that she assumed he would be a difficult customer or one who could not meet the bank's standards. "Of course," she replied, though her tone carried a trace of impatience. "Please have a seat over there. Someone will be with you shortly." He nodded politely and moved toward the chairs set neatly against the wall. As he sat down, he noticed a few people in line, glancing at him briefly. Some with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. A young man with a suit smirked and whispered something to the woman next to him, who chuckled softly. The man ignored them, keeping his attention focused on the folder resting on his lap. Inside it were documents he had prepared carefully over the past week's financial papers, references and records that reflected his knowledge and experience. He had been through moments like this before. Many times in his life, he had been underestimated because of the way he looked, the modest way he carried himself, or the quiet tone of his voice. Today was no different, yet he remained patient. He had a purpose, and he would see it through with dignity. A few minutes passed, and the teller returned, motioning for him to come forward. "All right," she said, her voice brisk. "Let's see what we can do. Do you have the necessary documents with you?" He opened his folder carefully, taking out each sheet in order. He handed them to her one by one, explaining in clear, simple terms what each document represented. He spoke with confidence, but never with arrogance. Each word was measured, each explanation precise. He could see that the teller's initial impatience was giving way to mild surprise. This was not a man who struggled to understand numbers or procedures, as she had silently assumed. He was methodical, well-prepared, and knowledgeable. Still, the teller's tone remained slightly dismissive. "I'm not sure you meet our requirements for this type of loan," she said finally. "We have very specific guidelines, and from what I can see, your application may not qualify." He nodded, keeping his composure. "I understand," he replied calmly. "Could you please explain which parts I need to adjust so I can meet the guidelines?" "I am willing to provide additional information or make necessary changes." The teller hesitated. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She was not used to being approached with such patience and respect, especially by someone she had already judged. She shuffled the papers and muttered a few instructions, which the man listened to attentively, nodding and taking notes. While they spoke, another employee, a young man behind the counter, whispered to a colleague, "I don't know why he even came here." "Looks like a poor man who doesn't know what he's doing." Colleague shrugged and rolled her eyes. The man, of course, could hear nothing of this. He had long learned that words spoken in passing often reflected more about the speaker than the listener. After a few more minutes, the teller finally said, "You may need to return with some additional documents. That will give us a better idea if your request can be approved." Her voice softened slightly, though it still carried the faint trace of condescension. "I'll hold these papers for you." The man nodded once again, carefully gathering his documents and returning them to the folder. "Thank you for your time," he said. "I will prepare the additional information and come back tomorrow." He left the teller counter and walked slowly toward the exit. As he passed by other customers waiting in line, he noticed a few glances lingering on him longer than necessary. Some faces were curious, others skeptical, but none of them knew the truth about him. None of them knew that behind his modest appearance was a sharp mind, a quiet determination, and a sense of fairness that had guided him through many challenges in life. Outside, the air was colder, and he pulled his coat a little tighter around him. He walked with a measured pace, thinking about the interaction and the subtle judgments he had encountered. It was not the first time he had faced such assumptions, and it would not be the last. Yet he did not feel bitterness or anger. He felt calm resolve. He knew that appearances could deceive, and he was determined to let his actions, not his looks, reveal who he really was. As he walked down the street, he noticed a small cafe on the corner. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air, and for a moment he paused, considering a brief rest before heading home. But he decided against it, not because he disliked coffee, but because he had work to do. He needed to review his notes, make sure every document was in order, and prepare for the next day. Preparation had always been his strength. He passed a group of children playing near a park, their laughter ringing through the morning. He smiled faintly at their joy, appreciating the simple moment of life unfolding. In many ways, his life had been filled with challenges, struggles, and small victories, yet he still found peace in observing the world around him. Each interaction, each passing moment, was a lesson in patience, humility, and understanding. By the time he reached his modest apartment, the city was fully awake, with cars honking, people hurrying to work, and shops opening their doors. He entered his building quietly, greeted the doorman with a nod, and took the stairs to his apartment on the 3rd floor. The elevator was crowded with professionals in business attire, all seemingly in a rush, none paying much attention to the man in his worn coat. He moved through the small crowd with ease, never hurried, never flustered. Inside his apartment, he spread the documents across his small dining table, reviewing each page carefully. He made notes in the margins, double-checked calculations, and ensured that everything was in perfect order. He was meticulous because he knew that tomorrow would be important. Tomorrow, he would return to the bank, not just as a customer, but as someone who had prepared thoroughly and would demand respect, not through loud words, but through facts, knowledge. In quiet authority, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the room. He paused for a moment, letting the warmth touch his face, and reflected on the day. Despite the dismissive looks, the subtle laughter, and the assumptions he had faced, he felt a sense of calm determination. He knew that the world often judges people by appearances, and many assume wealth or skill is visible at first glance. But he had learned, through years of experience, that true capability often lies beneath the surface. Unseen by those quick to judge, as night fell, he packed his folder carefully, ensuring that each document remained in pristine condition. He prepared himself mentally for the next day, knowing that patience, clarity, and calm confidence would carry him through. He did not need to raise his voice or assert himself aggressively. He only needed to let his preparation and knowledge speak on his behalf. Finally, he lay down for a brief rest, but sleep did not come easily. His mind raced with possibilities, scenarios, and strategies. Yet even in his planning, he maintained a sense of calm, knowing that tomorrow would be the day when his careful preparation would meet the assumptions of others. It was not about proving anyone wrong through anger or confrontation. It was about demonstrating truth, fairness, and competence. Outside, the city lights flickered to life, illuminating the streets and casting long shadows. Somewhere down the street, the bank remained open, busy with people who still assumed they understood the world around them. They did not know the quiet man who had walked in today, who had left without complaint, who carried more knowledge and authority than they could imagine. They could not know yet that appearances were deceiving, that humility and patience often precede great impact, in the stillness of the apartment, the man finally allowed himself a deep breath. He was ready for tomorrow. The small victories of preparation, patience, and calm had already been won today. He knew that when he returned to the bank, the story would change, not because of force or arrogance, but because of quiet determination, skill, and the truth that could not be ignored. He drifted into a light sleep, knowing that the next day would bring the first step in a journey that would leave others surprised and humbled, and that his actions would speak louder than any assumptions or judgments made about him. The next morning arrived quietly. The sky a soft mix of gray and pale yellow as the sun began to rise. The streets were still mostly empty, except for the occasional early commuter hurrying past. The man left his apartment with the same measured steps he had taken the previous day. His coat was buttoned up tightly, and the folder he carried under his arm seemed almost like an extension of himself, filled with carefully prepared documents that reflected his knowledge and careful attention to detail. He walked with purpose, not rushing, but moving with a steady rhythm that spoke of focus and determination. When he reached the bank, a few more people had already arrived, some standing outside, waiting for the doors to open. The man observed them quietly, taking note of the casual chatter and the occasional glance toward the bank's entrance. None of them noticed him in any significant way. To most, he still appeared like any other modest man walking down the street. They did not know, and could not know, that this man had prepared himself to change the course of their assumptions and perhaps their lives. With a quiet and unwavering patience, the bank doors opened with a soft jingle, and he stepped inside. The interior seemed the same as yesterday, filled with the low hum of activity, the subtle shuffle of papers, and the quiet conversations between staff and customers. The man made his way to the same teller counter, where a few faces from the previous day were already present, some with faint recognition, others still focused on their work. The teller who had assisted him yesterday noticed him almost immediately and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Though it lacked warmth or understanding, he returned the nod politely, and then stepped aside to wait, his eyes scanning the room. He noticed a few employees whispering quietly among themselves, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Some customers glanced in his direction, some out of idle interest, others with faint amusement. The man ignored them all, keeping his focus on the task ahead. He had come prepared, not to argue or demand, but to present the truth and demonstrate competence and authority through his actions. When the teller approached him, her voice carried a slightly different tone from yesterday, one tinged with cautious curiosity. "Good morning again. I see you have your documents ready. Shall we go through them?" He nodded. "Yes, thank you. I have prepared additional information that I hope will clarify any questions about my application." He opened his folder carefully and began to explain each document with a calm, steady voice. Every page was organized, every calculation double-checked, every statement precise. The teller, initially hesitant and slightly impatient, began to look more closely at the documents, her brow furrowing as she realized that the man had anticipated potential concerns and addressed them all. With clarity, a few moments passed in silence as she reviewed the papers. The man remained patient, standing respectfully beside the counter, his demeanor quiet but firm. He did not rush, did not raise his voice, and did not try to charm or plead. He simply allowed the evidence of his preparation to speak for itself. As she read, the teller's expression shifted from mild annoyance to surprise. It became clear that she had underestimated him the day before, assuming his modest appearance reflected limited knowledge or ability. Yet here he was, demonstrating not only understanding, but foresight, careful planning, and attention to detail that few of the bank's regular clients could match. Another employee, noticing the teller's attention and her changing expression, leaned over and whispered, "Isn't that the man from yesterday? He looked so poor and quiet. How did he prepare all this?" His tone carried disbelief, mixed with curiosity. The teller did not respond immediately. She continued reviewing the documents, her hands slightly shaken as she checked the numbers and cross-referenced the papers. The room felt a subtle shift. A few other employees stopped to glance at the scene, sensing that something unusual was happening. The man did not notice them, nor did he care about their surprise or curiosity. His focus was solely on ensuring that everything was accurate and clearly presented. After several minutes, the teller looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of respect in her gaze, though it was tentative and cautious. "I have to admit," she said quietly, "you have prepared these thoroughly. I did not expect this level of detail." He smiled faintly, a simple gesture that carried neither pride nor arrogance. "I believe preparation and clarity are important," he replied. "It is not about impressing anyone, but about ensuring that information is correct and transparent." The teller nodded, still holding the papers. "I will need to discuss these with the manager to confirm everything. Please wait a moment." She moved toward the manager's office, leaving the man standing quietly, still composed and calm, as he waited. He observed the subtle reactions around him. Some employees whispered to each other, trying to piece together who he was and how someone who appeared so modest could present documents with such precision and authority. A few customers glanced at him with curiosity, sensing that this was not an ordinary interaction. Though they could not articulate why, the manager returned shortly. A middle-aged man with a stern but professional demeanor, he motioned for the man to follow him into a small meeting room. The man complied, walking with steady steps, not rushed, not hesitant, and carrying himself with quiet confidence. Inside the room, the manager gestured for him to sit, and he did, opening the folder once more to review the documents carefully. For the next hour, the man and the manager went over each page, discussing numbers, regulations, and procedures. The manager asked questions, some straightforward, some probing, and the man answered each one calmly, clearly, and respectfully. It became apparent quickly that he had anticipated every potential question and had prepared thoughtful, accurate responses for each outside the room. The teller and other staff waited, quietly observing the interaction. Whispers filled the corridor as they speculated about the man's background, his knowledge, and how someone who looked so unassuming could have such command over the details. Their initial assumptions about his abilities were slowly crumbling, replaced by surprise, respect, and even a hint of humility. Finally, the manager closed the folder and looked at the man directly. "I must say, I am impressed by your preparation and understanding. It is clear that you have taken the time to ensure everything is accurate and complete. I apologize for any assumptions I may have made earlier." The man nodded politely. "Thank you. I believe that thoroughness and clarity are important, regardless of appearances. I hope the information provided helps make the process smooth for everyone." The manager's expression softened further, a mixture of surprise and respect evident in his eyes. He motioned for the man to stand, and they shook hands firmly. "Your efforts have not gone unnoticed. I will ensure that your application receives proper consideration," the manager said. The man gathered his folder, closing it carefully, and gave a final nod. "Thank you for your time," he said. Then, with quiet composure, walked out of the room and returned to the bank's main floor. As he passed the employees who had whispered about him earlier, he noticed their expressions had changed. Gone were the smirks and dismissive glances, replaced by a newfound respect. Some nodded silently, while others simply watched in quiet awe. The man did not seek acknowledgement, nor did he linger for praise. He had accomplished what he came to do, not through confrontation, but through calm confidence, preparation, and integrity. He left the bank with the same measured steps as before, the folder tucked securely under his arm. Outside, the city was alive with activity, but he remained focused on the purpose he had achieved. He had demonstrated that appearances can be deceiving, that patience and preparation carry far more weight than assumptions, and that true competence often lies quietly beneath the surface. Walking down the street, he noticed the small details he often appreciated: a child's laughter, the subtle rhythm of life moving forward, and the faint scent of coffee from a nearby cafe. He smiled faintly, appreciating the quiet satisfaction of having done what needed to be done with dignity and respect. He knew that tomorrow would bring another encounter, perhaps one even more significant, but he did not worry. He was ready, as he had always been, relying on calm, patience, and quiet confidence. Others may have judged him based on appearances, but he had learned long ago that judgment is not always truth, and that respect is earned through actions, not assumptions. The man returned to his apartment later that evening, careful to keep the folder intact and organized. He reviewed the day's interactions in his mind, thinking about what had changed and what he had accomplished. Though no dramatic events had occurred, he knew that subtle shifts had taken place. Attitudes had begun to change. Assumptions were being questioned, and the stage was being set for what was to come. As night fell and the city lights glimmered outside, he allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The world often misjudges people based on looks or circumstance, but he had found that integrity, preparation, and patience always reveal the truth. Tomorrow, he would continue this quiet journey, demonstrating that actions, knowledge, and respect carry far more weight than appearances ever could. With a final deep breath, he set the folder aside, ready to rest for the night. He had proven, even in small ways, that humility and quiet strength can achieve what loud words and arrogance cannot. Tomorrow would be another day, another step in a path defined not by wealth or appearance, but by character, preparation, and the courage to show truth through calm determination. The following morning, the streets were colder and quieter, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy and still before the city fully wakes. The man left his apartment with a steady calm, his leather folder under his arm, neatly organized and carefully prepared. He walked with his usual measured pace, observing the familiar sights along the way. Shop windows reflected the pale light, and the few early pedestrians barely noticed him, preoccupied with their own routines. Yet he moved with purpose, knowing that today would be different as he approached the bank. A small crowd had already gathered outside. Some were there for their morning business, others were curious about the quiet man who had visited the day before. He noticed a few employees stepping out briefly to exchange whispers, their faces showing a mix of intrigue and unease. None of them knew what he carried or why he had come. But the anticipation in the air was subtle, palpable. He entered the bank quietly, letting the soft jingle of the door announce his arrival without seeking attention. Inside, the usual hum of activity surrounded him, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, papers shuffling, but there was a slight tension that wasn't there before. The employees remembered him, remembered his careful preparation and calm demeanor. The teller from the previous day gave a small nod, this time with a hint of respect mingled with apprehension. The man walked straight to the counter, his eyes calm and focused. He handed the folder to the teller, who paused, glancing at him before opening it. Her hands trembled slightly, a sign that she was beginning to realize the weight of what she was holding. The folder contained more than just numbers and forms. It contained a careful record of observations, evidence of procedural errors, and clear documentation of the issues he had quietly noticed over time. "I have come to clarify a few points and ensure everything is transparent," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I hope this will make it easier to resolve any discrepancies." The teller nodded, flipping through the pages with growing realization. The other employees began to gather subtly, their curiosity winning over their initial hesitation. Whispers started, low and uncertain, as they tried to piece together what the man's purpose could be. Some of them began to recognize the depth of his preparation and the careful thought he had put into every detail. One of the young employees, who had laughed at him the day before, whispered to a colleague, "He's not what we thought. Look at this. He's caught errors that we didn't even notice. How did he even know?" The colleague shook her head in disbelief. The man, as usual, remained focused, unaware of the growing murmurs around him. He knew that his actions and documentation would speak louder than their assumptions ever could. The manager arrived shortly after, a middle-aged man known for his strict adherence to rules and procedures. He looked at the man with surprise, recognizing him from the previous day. "Good morning," the manager said, his voice polite but cautious. "I understand you have some concerns to discuss?" "Yes," the man replied simply. "I have observed a few inconsistencies and thought it would be best to present them clearly and ensure that everything is accurate." The manager gestured toward a small meeting room, and the man followed, walking with calm confidence. Inside the room, he opened his folder and laid out the documents carefully. Each sheet was organized, annotated, and explained with precision. The manager leaned in, reading, checking numbers, and verifying the details. Every question he asked was met with a calm, concise, and clear answer. The man's demeanor never wavered. He spoke with authority, not arrogance. And his quiet confidence filled the room. As the manager examined the documents, the truth began to emerge. The errors were clear, the discrepancies undeniable. Procedures had been overlooked, rules unintentionally broken, and responsibilities mismanaged. The evidence was meticulously presented, leaving little room for doubt. The manager's initial skepticism gave way to acknowledgement. "I must admit," he said slowly, "you have done a thorough job. These issues are serious and need to be addressed immediately." The man nodded respectfully. "I believe it is important that the right steps are taken. Accuracy and fairness are essential in every process." Outside the meeting room, the staff waited, whispering and glancing toward the door. They had begun to understand that the man they had underestimated was far from ordinary. His quiet strength, patience, and preparation had revealed more than they could have imagined. Even the teller who had been dismissive the day before seemed humbled, her previous arrogance replaced with tentative respect. Inside, the manager asked the man for further clarification on certain points, and the man responded calmly, clearly explaining every detail. His knowledge was thorough, his insight precise. Every question was met with careful explanation, and the manager realized that this man's attention to detail could prevent major mistakes if acted upon. After several minutes, the manager leaned back, taking a deep breath. "I appreciate the effort and thoroughness you've demonstrated," he said. "It is rare to see such preparation and clarity. These issues must be addressed at the highest level, and I will ensure that appropriate action is taken." The man gathered his documents, closing the folder carefully. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I only hope that the steps taken will reflect accuracy and fairness." He walked out of the meeting room and returned to the main floor. As he passed the employees who had watched him, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Respect had replaced doubt, curiosity had replaced mockery, and subtle acknowledgement replaced whispering. People began to realize that appearances can be deceiving, and that humility and preparation often reveal far more than outward confidence or loudness. The man left the bank with his usual calm, measured steps. Outside, the morning sun was breaking through clouds, casting light on the quiet streets. He did not linger to watch the reactions he had sparked, nor did he seek acknowledgement. His focus remained on the purpose he had set, to demonstrate that competence, preparation, and integrity were more powerful than assumptions and appearances. He walked slowly toward his apartment, observing the small details of life around him. A child waved from a distance, and he smiled faintly, appreciating the simplicity of such moments. A street musician played softly, the notes drifting across the morning air. The world continued in its rhythm. But he had made a subtle yet meaningful impact. Returning home, he carefully placed the folder on his small table, reviewing the events of the morning. He reflected on the shift he had observed in the bank, noting how quickly perceptions could change when faced with evidence and quiet authority. He did not feel pride, only satisfaction that preparation and patience had brought clarity and respect where assumptions had once ruled. As evening approached, he reviewed his documents again, making small notes and ensuring that everything remained accurate and complete. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring another opportunity to solidify the changes he had begun to set in motion. He understood that true influence comes not from confrontation or arrogance, but from knowledge, integrity, and the calm assertion of truth as night fell. The city lights illuminated the streets, casting soft reflections across windows and pavements. The man sat quietly, thinking about the world around him and the subtle ways in which he had begun to challenge assumptions. He understood that not everyone would notice, not everyone would recognize, but those who did would carry the lesson forward. That appearances can be misleading, that humility and preparation carry weight, and that quiet confidence often speaks louder than any boast. He prepared himself mentally for the next day, knowing that the final steps in this chapter would require both tact and courage. He set aside the folder, ready to rest, and reflected on the lessons of patience, observation, and meticulous preparation. The world often judges quickly, but he had learned to let actions reveal the truth, and to wait for the results to unfold naturally. Finally, he closed his eyes, resting in quiet assurance. The bank had been challenged, perceptions had begun to shift, and the stage was being set for what was to come. Tomorrow, he would continue his careful path, demonstrating that respect, accuracy, and integrity are always more powerful than assumptions and appearances. The next day, the streets seemed unusually quiet for a weekday morning. The man left his apartment with the familiar folder in hand, his steps calm and purposeful. The cold air bit lightly at his cheeks, but he walked steadily, prepared for what lay ahead. He knew that today was significant. The preparations of the previous days had led him to this moment. He did not rush, yet each step carried a sense of quiet determination. As he approached the bank, a few employees noticed him from the windows. Whispers began again, but this time they were different. There was a mixture of curiosity and unease. Those who had dismissed him before were now questioning their assumptions. The quiet man who had entered the bank 2 days ago had already begun to leave an impression. And today, that impression would deepen. The man entered the bank as usual, the soft jingle of the door announcing his presence. This time, a few customers glanced at him, sensing that something important was about to happen, though they could not say what. He walked past the teller, who had assisted him before. She gave a small, respectful nod, clearly aware that the events of the last 2 days had changed her perception of him. She handed him a visitor's pass with a slight shake of her head, an unspoken acknowledgement that he was no longer just an ordinary customer. He made his way to the manager's office, the folder tucked under his arm. The manager, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, looked up in surprise. "You are here again?" he asked, a hint of curiosity and caution in his voice. "Yes," the man replied calmly. "I have brought the necessary documents for a matter that requires attention." The manager gestured for him to sit, and the man opened his folder carefully. He removed a single sheet of paper from the folder and handed it to the manager. The manager took it, expecting another report or clarification, but what he saw immediately caused his eyes to widen slightly. It was a termination letter, clearly addressed to a specific employee within the bank. The letter outlined the reasons for termination, referencing clear violations and errors documented meticulously over the past weeks. For a moment, silence filled the room. The manager looked at the man in disbelief. This is serious. How did you obtain the authority to issue this?" he asked, his voice steady, but tinged with concern. The man spoke quietly, his tone firm yet calm. "I have been authorized to report these discrepancies and ensure that proper action is taken. My intention is not to create conflict, but to ensure fairness and accuracy. The violations in question cannot be ignored, and this letter is the necessary step to correct the issues." The manager leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He glanced at the letter again, then back at the man. "I had no idea you had this level of involvement. You were quiet, unassuming. We thought you were just another customer with modest means." The man smiled faintly. "Appearances can be deceiving. My role is to ensure that proper procedures are followed. I believe that respect and integrity are shown not through appearances, but through actions and adherence to truth." The manager nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the moment. He could no longer doubt the preparation, intelligence, and authority of the man before him. The quiet demeanor, the humble appearance, and the careful patience over the last few days had masked a depth of knowledge and responsibility that was now undeniable. Outside the office, whispers and murmurs grew among the staff. They sensed that something unusual was happening. A few had caught glimpses of the termination letter as it was handed to the manager, and the realization that the quiet man had real authority began to settle in. Those who had been dismissive, even mocking, the previous days now looked uneasy. Respect, cautious and tentative, replaced laughter and indifference. Inside, The manager studied the letter more closely, checking the documentation that accompanied it. The evidence was clear and compelling. Each violation was documented, each procedural error carefully noted, each step leading logically to the conclusion that action was required. The man answered every question with patience and clarity, demonstrating knowledge that went far beyond what most people assumed from his modest appearance. The manager cleared his throat, finally breaking the tension. I see now that your preparation is thorough and your actions are justified. These issues must be addressed immediately. I will ensure that this letter is processed and that the necessary steps are taken to correct these problems. The man nodded. Thank you. My only concern is that the actions taken are fair and accurate. The staff involved should understand that the goal is not punishment for its own sake, but correction and proper adherence to procedure.
Ow.
The manager leaned back, taking a deep breath. I will handle this. You have demonstrated more than competence. You have shown integrity, patience, and respect. I underestimated you based on appearances, and I apologize for that. The man closed his folder, carefully placing the documents inside. He did not speak further, only offered a small nod. He had not come to boast, to lecture, or to claim recognition. His goal had been to ensure accuracy, fairness, and accountability. He had achieved that. The respect and acknowledgement from the manager were only natural consequences of his careful actions. When he stepped back into the main area of the bank, the atmosphere had changed. Employees who had been whispering nervously now watched him with new understanding. The teller, who had once dismissed him, stood a little straighter, her expression one of quiet acknowledgement. Even the customers seemed to sense that they were witnessing a subtle but significant event, a demonstration of the fact that one should never judge by appearance alone. The man walked calmly toward the exit, his steps measured and deliberate. Outside, the morning air felt different, somehow lighter, filled with a sense of quiet accomplishment. He did not linger to watch reactions. He had no need for recognition. His work had been done, the truth had been revealed, and fairness had been established as he walked down the street. He noticed the small details. He always cherished the sound of children playing in the distance, the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, the soft rhythm of life continuing around him. The world moved on, but he had left a mark that would ripple quietly through the bank and its employees, reminding them that integrity and preparation often outweigh assumptions and appearances. Returning to his apartment later that day, he carefully organized his documents, reflecting on the morning's events. He thought about the shift he had witnessed, how assumptions could crumble under the weight of knowledge and preparation, how quiet patience could command more respect than arrogance or noise. He felt no pride, only calm satisfaction that the right actions had been taken. As night fell, he reviewed the events in his mind, preparing for the next steps that might unfold. Though today had resolved a major issue, he understood that influence and change are gradual, requiring careful observation, consistency, and integrity. He set aside his folder, ready to rest, knowing that his actions had already begun to teach lessons that would resonate beyond the immediate moment. In the quiet of his apartment, he allowed himself a brief smile, appreciating the subtle victories of patience, clarity, and quiet authority. The bank had been challenged, perceptions had shifted, and the stage was set for further revelations. The world often judges hastily, but he had demonstrated that true strength and influence come not from outward show or appearances, but from preparation, integrity, and calm resolve. Finally, he lay down to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also opportunities to continue demonstrating the power of truth, fairness, and patience. The city outside continued its rhythm, unaware of the subtle lessons it had already witnessed through the quiet actions of one determined man. Cautiously, "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "I did not understand at first, but you have taught me the importance of preparation and respect. I realize now that I judged incorrectly based on how someone looked." The man smiled faintly, a gesture free of pride. It is natural to make assumptions. The important thing is to recognize them and correct course. Respect and diligence are what matter most. A few other employees joined the conversation, offering their quiet thanks and acknowledging the lessons they had learned from his patient and methodical approach. The man spoke with each of them briefly, his tone calm, his words deliberate, leaving a subtle but lasting impression on everyone he encountered. The lessons he imparted were not about power or authority, but about integrity, fairness, and humility. Word of his actions began to spread quietly through the bank. Employees who had once been indifferent or dismissive now reflected on their behavior. Realizing that they had misjudged someone based on appearances alone, even those who had initially resisted the corrections now understood the importance of careful observation, preparation, and adherence to rules. The man's quiet influence was reshaping attitudes, fostering an environment where respect, diligence, and integrity mattered more than status or outward presentation. Outside the bank, life moved on as usual. Customers came and went, unaware of the subtle but meaningful changes occurring inside. Yet for the employees, the atmosphere had shifted. There was a renewed sense of focus, recognition that careful attention to detail and thoughtful preparation could prevent mistakes and misunderstandings. The quiet man who had once appeared modest and unremarkable had left an enduring mark. Not through force or confrontation, but through calm, methodical actions and unwavering patience. The man walked away from the bank slowly, observing the city around him. Children played along the sidewalks, a street musician played a soft tune, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. The world continued in its natural rhythm, yet he knew that subtle changes had taken root within the bank. He did not seek recognition or accolades. His satisfaction lay in knowing that fairness, diligence, and respect had been affirmed, and that the lessons he imparted would continue to resonate quietly among those who had witnessed them. He reflected on the events of the past week. His actions had shown that appearances can be misleading, and that patience, preparation, and integrity hold greater power than assumptions and superficial judgments. The quiet confidence he had maintained had inspired reflection among those who had initially underestimated him, and his calm authority had ensured that the necessary actions were taken to correct errors and reinforce fairness. By the time he returned to his apartment, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow across the city streets. He placed the folder on his small table, carefully arranging the documents and reviewing the week's events in his mind. Each step he had taken, each interaction, had contributed to a subtle but lasting transformation. The bank staff had learned to question assumptions, value diligence, and treat everyone with respect, regardless of outward appearance. As evening deepened into night, he reflected on the power of quiet actions. Influence does not always come from loud words or dramatic gestures. It often comes from patience, preparation, and steadfast adherence to principles. His calm persistence had changed perceptions, inspired humility, and reinforced integrity among those who had once underestimated him. Finally, he set aside the folder and allowed himself a moment of stillness. He knew that life would continue, challenges would arise, and perceptions would always be tested. Yet he had demonstrated in a quiet and meaningful way that preparation, respect, and integrity could speak louder than appearances, assumptions, or superficial judgments. His week-long journey had concluded not with fanfare or recognition, but with subtle, enduring lessons that would continue to shape the actions and attitudes of those he had encountered. Lying down that night, felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had accomplished his goal, not by demanding acknowledgement, but by acting with patience, intelligence, and integrity. The world outside continued in its rhythm, yet, within the walls of the bank, the subtle impact of his actions would be felt for a long time. Respect, diligence, and fairness had been affirmed, and the lessons of humility, preparation, and quiet authority would resonate among those who had learned them. In this quiet reflection, he understood that the truest power lies not in appearances, wealth, or position, but in the consistent, patient, and principled actions of one who understands the value of integrity, fairness, and respect. The man had entered the bank a seemingly ordinary figure, and yet, through careful preparation, unwavering calm, and thoughtful action, He had changed the perceptions of those around him and left a lasting mark that would extend far beyond the events of the week.